Hello, my name is Jim Kibler, and this is part 2 in a series of building our Colonial Rifle Kit, our Kibler's Long Rifles Colonial Rifle Kit. If you haven't seen part 1, go back to part 1 and start from the beginning, and there is a brief introduction to myself and the nature of our company in that video. The first video we covered installing the barrel tang, the breech plug, the barrel tang, the butt plate, trigger plate. All those were done in the first video. One note is these videos are pretty much all real time, not much information is cut at all, so the amount of time that the video took was basically the same amount of time that the task took me to do while explaining it. Those steps are done. We have a kind of a choice of different steps to go to now. I'm going to go ahead and go inlet, or not inlet, but fit the wood box to the butt plate and just install the wood box. That is what I'll basically do. This has what's called a sliding wood patch box, which you can see the cavity in the stock. And then there's a shaped cover that'll come with your kit that has a dovetail shape, and that will slide in. When it's completely fit, it'll go all the way in, but it'll slide in. The dovetail holds it in place, and it's a cover, a lid for the box. In the box you could store cleaning equipment, gun flints, patches, various things. Sometimes it's referred to as a patch box, but more commonly probably in this period would be a box. So the inlet in the stock is pretty nearly finished, complete. There is a little bit of extra stock on the butt plate, so we do have to file a little bit off the butt plate in order to fit the box lid to the stock. So there is a little, the butt plate is partially dovetailed, but not completely. So we're going to go ahead and use the wood as a guide to tell us how much brass needs to be removed. So I'm going to move this little prop. By the way, a prop like this works real well. You can make one out of just a couple 2x4s with a little bit of a base, maybe a C-clamp so you can adjust the height. It doesn't have to be much, but something to support the gun on the end is a real good thing, besides your vise. So I'm going to actually move it back in the vise a little bit, then move the prop underneath it again. Give it a little bit better. Move my light so I can see what I'm doing. Now I'm going to swing around to the other side and start working on the butt plate. So I'm going to choose a file to get rid of this brass, a 3-cornered file, which here's an example of one. This one has one side of the teeth ground off, which is it's a good thing. You wouldn't have to use a file that has the teeth ground off for this operation, but it's a good thing. And there is a little bit of brass that has to be removed here. Not a huge amount, but a little bit. So a fairly coarse file is a nice thing. In time, we may be machining this out to pretty much a finished size. I don't know. We might be able to accomplish that. But for now, we have to file a little bit out. So I'm going to take care of the bottom first, the floor. So I'm going to put a cutting edge, an edge that has teeth down, and start working it across. In a word about filing, I know people say that you have to lift up the file on the return stroke, and that's something that's often repeated, but it's a good thing. It's not completely necessary, and it's not practical a lot. When you're building guns, especially custom guns, you learn to file very well and very efficiently. And that's something that's not always practical or possible. I'm trying to bring the bottom down. I keep turning the file just as I work into the corner. I'm putting the safe edge in the corner so it doesn't cut the sides of the dovetail. We'll trim those when I want to, but right now I'm just focusing on getting the bottom down. And I like to just go a tiny bit above the wood surface, just for final fitting. Kind of feeling it and looking at it, and seeing what it's doing. that's getting pretty good. One of the keys is to, with all this stuff, is to go fast, but not too fast. Now, if you don't have much experience, you know, you need to slow down a little bit, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But okay, so that's looking pretty good along there. So now I'm going to trim the sides of the dovetail a little bit. So I'm going to put that safe edge, the edge that doesn't have any teeth, and put it down. And I can work over. Again, use the wood as a guide. Now, I'm not going to go quite all the way. I'm going to go most of the way, but I'm going to stop a little short because we don't want gaps when we put our box lid in. So we're going to sneak up on it just a little bit. Okay, so that's probably a pretty safe level. I am going to switch to a little finer file. One that has a little bit sharper corner. But you wouldn't have to do that. One file would be sufficient. Not critical. Get rid of the point. Get in there a little more. Okay. If any of the butt plate sticks up, which it may a little bit, it's good to file that down. And we'll come back to that here in just a second. Let me grab a sanding block and we'll sand that surface a little bit. So a sanding block, just a piece of wood with a sandpaper on, it, and we're gonna just hit this whole surface just a little bit. Remove any tooling, mill marks, and that sort of thing. Not get crazy on it, but do a little bit. So now I've picked up the box lid, and we'll see if it'll fit. So we're gonna slide it in. And actually, there, it goes in all the way. You can see, if you look at the end, there's really no gap at all. It's a very good fit. So this is actually a very good fit, but it's a little too tight of a fit. And the reason it's a little too tight of a fit, if there's any changes in moisture, if you're out in the rain, hunting, this box can swell up, your stock can swell up, and it can just lock in place, and you won't be able to get it out. So we're gonna open it up a little bit. Make sure there's no gaps at all, which there really aren't. It fits very, very good. We're just going to open up that size a little bit. So I'm going to step around, get the file again that I want, and we're going to take a little bit off the bottom and a little bit off the sides too, just to give a tiny bit of wiggle. Need a little bit, not much, just a little bit. Okay, let's see here. Where's my other file? There it is. This one just has a tiny bit sharper corner. Okay. It's a good idea too to come along the edge of this inlet, and it's kind of sharp, so come along. This is just it's a steel rule that has some sandpaper stuck to it. Just use a little piece of sandpaper folded over, it'd be fine too. This is just something I happened to pick up. Handy. Knock off the sharpness of that a little bit. And I'm going to do the same with the edge of the box. Just knock off that corner a little bit. Corner of that dovetail. Okay. And while I'm at it, the bottom of the box lid, I'm going to sand flat. Just a little bit. This is 150 grit paper just to clean it up a little bit. Probably a little bit on the step portion of the lid as well. Now you may notice that we provide the box lids completely shaped, so they're a very nice, pleasing shape. Pleasing to visually and also historically correct. You can see they're quite thin, which is how the originals were made. So that's a very nice feature that these kits offer. So there's a bunch of filings and stuff in that box cavity, so I'm going to go ahead and pull the gun out of the vise and dump that garbage out of there. And then try again for the fit here. be pretty good. Any luck? Okay, it's going in there, so it's pretty good. We're gonna say that's good enough is what we're gonna do. So the next step, there's a little bit of play. It could be loosened up a little bit, but it's not bad. For right now, we're gonna call that good enough and move forward. I will say a little bit about if it is tight, what you can do. If it is tight, you can remove a little material from the sides of the dovetail of the box lid. And one way to do that is to take a 3-cornered file that the end is ground flat on, and you can see if I can figure out the best way to show you. You can use it as a bit of a scraper where you can come along, and that's a little bit easier than trying to file that long surface. So that helps. Okay, so right now we're going to put it in here, and we're going to put a little attention to the end of the box lid. So I'm going to have it in place. I'm going to clamp it in place when it's all the way in. This is just a little quick grip clamp that sort of works good for this stuff. And in this case, I'm just going to have the end of the box lid be wood. Sometimes a brass plate is put on the end of the box lid, and in those cases, you'll remove basically remove wood. The amount of wood needs to be removed is the same thickness as a brass plate. But sometimes on original guns, they didn't have a brass plate on the end, and they just had the end grain of the wood, so that's what we're going to do in this case. So let me find a file here. So I'm holding the box in place, and I'm going to file it pretty much flush with the butt plate. Not a lot sticks out, but a little bit does, and we're going to get after it and just file it flush. With all filing, it's a nice thing to kind of move in crossing patterns or cross direction. It helps keeps you from having any grooves, or maybe grooves aren't the best word, but any irregularities in the shape. It keeps the surface a little truer, a little flatter. So if we would have finished the butt plate first, then an operation like this would have then marred up the butt plate. So this is an example of why you don't want to file the butt plate first or polish the butt plate. Install it in its cast form, and then we'll come back. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I see one little mark, but it's not enough to worry about. So I'm going to come back with a little abrasive paper. Find a piece here. Wrap it around the file, and this is 150 grit paper. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now we'll pull it out. I'll take a piece of paper and just break these corners a little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit. See how it looks again. Slide it in there, and it goes in place, and it looks good. We may be a little tight right there, so I'm going to probably take the file and hit that a tiny bit, just to make the fit more even. We'll try again. Okay. I like that. So now we're on to the spring that holds the catch spring that holds the box lid in place. So this could fall out at any point now. So we need something to retain it. So included in the kit is this little part here, which is a spring that gets attached to the bottom side of the box lid, as you can see, held in place with a screw. And when it's held in place, it'll snap and catch the edge of the butt plate. So that's what we're going to move our attention to right now. So we have a screw that holds that in place in the kit. Pull it out of my parts box here. See what it looks like. Just a little short wood screw. So we're going to get it started. There's a hole already in the box lid for that. Kind of have to hold it in place. I generally drop these things, but we'll try to get it started. Come on, without making a mess of things. I didn't put any lubricant on this. I probably should have, but I think we can get by without. Okay, it's doing well. Pull it down snug and tight. Make sure our spring is centered in our inlet, which it is. Come on. Centered, maybe snug it down a tiny bit more. That's good. Now here's the moment of truth to see if it'll catch the edge of the butt plate. I'm just gonna scrape this again to make sure there's no debris on the edge of that butt plate, inside corner. We'll see if it'll catch in place. Usually the way these springs are cast is there's very little extra stock on the little step that'll catch the edge of the butt plate. So it probably should fit first go here, but we'll see. Snaps in place, and the fit is pretty beautiful. Little play, that's not a big deal at all. Out, in, snaps in place. So that job is done. Everything's going pretty well, so we're gonna move on now. I will add one more bit of detail for the box. It's a nice thing to do is to take a scribe after you have the box shaped how you want. If you need to sand the edge of the box a little bit, you can. If there's any tool marks, which there are a few tool marks, but you can go around and once you get the edge cleaned up exactly how you want it. Come along with install the box lid. Come along with a scribe, anything that you sharpen, scribe along the edge. And that'll act as a little bit of a guide for you when you're sanding the stock, because the area of wood underneath the box lid needs to be a flat plane, and the other wood needs to come up to it. And you do see this on originals sometimes. So it kind of is a line that demarks the two stock surfaces. Pull it out, and we've got that done now. Okay, so next we're probably going to move on to the lock inletting. And the lock inletting is a little more of a lengthy subject, so we'll probably talk about it, and then that'll probably be the scope of this video, but we'll see how much time we have left. We'll drink a coffee here. I didn't grab a lock in my kit, so I need to pull one from our stock, so I'll be back in one moment. Okay, here's a lock that I pulled out of our stock. This is made by Jim Chambers. It's a round-faced English style lock, 1760 styling, and it's a pretty good lock, and it looks real good on the gun. But there is a little bit of prep in order to get it to fit, and I'm going to run you through that process. The biggest thing that needs done is the edges need filed slightly. And the edges of the plate are what I'm referring to. They're in an as-cast finish, and though relatively smooth, they still need to be trued up a little bit with the file first. So that's what we're going to go about doing first. It can be carefully done with the parts on the lock, but it's tricky. So it's better to take the lock apart and file the edge of the plate. I often do it without taking the lock apart just to save time, but we'll run through the process here. Now, I won't go through every detail of the lock disassembly. We probably should have another video just on that, but I can kind of show you. You can just watch me as I do it, explain just a little bit. So I'll pull out a screwdriver that I know fits the lock parts. They have a pretty fine slot, so I just took a cheap screwdriver and ground it down a little bit. You will need a mainspring vise. You can find mine. Mainspring vise is what compresses the mainspring, allows you to remove it from the lock. In a pinch, you may be able to do it with something like a hand vise or, even vice grips, but you have to be very careful. So we're going to put this on the spring and tighten it up just enough that it can be removed. If you're going to store it for a long period of time, you may want to back off the spring, the vise a little bit on the spring, but for as long as it's going to be clamped in place, we're just going to leave it. So now we can start taking the internals off, different ways to do this, but I like to just go after the sear first. It's a nice thing to put the screw with the part and you won't lose it. So that was the sear screw, bridle screw, pulls the bridle off. Okay, the fly. So the fly is a little thing in the tumbler that comes out, a little small thing, easy to lose, so don't forget about it. The sear spring. Take off the tumbler, screw. Now we need to remove the tumbler from the cock, which is pressed in place. Not a terribly tight press fit, but there is a bit of a press fit. So find a hammer. I guess there's one somewhere here. This will work. So probably the best way is to hold this over an open vise. Take a punch. This is just a piece of all thread made like in the shape of a square, filed or ground in a square, and you can tap down and drive the tumbler out. Since I've got this in the vise and I usually do it sort of in an odd way, I usually just hold it against my chest or stomach and usually a couple raps in it. Maybe not this time. I might just end up beating my stomach up. There it went. And you can pull that out. So there's a tumbler. Cock. Go ahead and take off the frizzen spring. The easiest way to take the frizzen spring off, you can use a little vise. A small mainspring vise will probably work, but a little thing that hooks over the top, you can squeeze. I'm not even sure what these things are called. Just a little bent piece of metal. You can put pressure and pull it off. That's the easiest way. Pull that screw out. But a regular vise, spring vise, would probably work fine. Set it aside. Oops. There we go. Now we'll take the frizzen off. Now we're left with just the plate, and we're going to put a little bevel on it like we talked about. Not a lot, and when I say bevel, it's just maybe a few degrees, less than 5 degrees, maybe 3 degrees, I don't know, but just a little bevel. I'm going to remove the gun from the vise here real quick so we can use our vise. So we're going to take this, clamp it in the vise, and start up here at the bolster. I'm going to step to this side. Start up in here with a 3-cornered file. Take the bolster down, because that's an area where there needs to be a little more draft than there is currently on the cast part. So I'm going to hit this area a little heavier, get a little more draft with a 3-cornered file. So if you question about me pulling the file back with it on the workpiece on the return stroke, you can listen to my rant in the first video. Don't pay attention to what your 7th grade shop teacher said. Okay, so now we're going to work it across, switch files. Let me find another file here that will work well. We'll use this one and kind of clean up the rest of this. Doesn't have to be perfect. Just get the parting lines off of it. And put a little bevel on it. So that area is done. We're going to flip it over in the vise. Start working on the other side. Again, I have just a little bevel, not a lot. You can come back with a little abrasive paper if you want. It's a nice thing. It allows the lock to pull in and out of the mortise a little bit easier if you do go a little further than just filing. But we'll probably just file it on this one. Okay, so we need a round file or something to get into that radius now. See what we've got on the bench. I've got a million files, but probably not the one I need. Here, this will work. It should allow us to get into that radius there. Okay. So that's pretty good. So now we're gonna hook a little burr on the inside, so I'm gonna go ahead and make sure we take a little bit of that burr off. Not much, just a tiny little bit. Okay. So now, since we have the lock apart, we're just gonna inlet the lock plate itself first. We could inlet the lock, we could reassemble and inlet it all in one unit, which is perfectly fine. But since it's apart, we're just gonna do it as a separate unit and see how it goes. So I'm gonna put the stock back in the vise. Okay, and we'll move that underneath there. What we'll do is we'll get a little transfer color. Same brush that we used before, has a little Prussian blue on it. Go around the edges. Okay. Don't want much, just a very little bit, just a little film. Okay, and we'll see how it's starting to fit. Now, it's a good idea to not just rely on the Prussian blue, but also use your eyes and kind of see how the plate is fitting in the mortise. And this is looking pretty good, I can see. So it should fit without too much trouble. Now, these are cast plates, and the size does vary a little bit. So depending on the plate that you receive, there may be more or less wood removal that's necessary. So we've tried to size the inletting such that it'll fit the smallest lock that's available. So if you get a lock on the large side, a little more wood may need to be removed. So one place that it's hitting right off the bat that I can see is a little spot right there in the corner of the inlet for the bolster on the lock. So we're just gonna hit that, knock that corner out. It has a little radius in it. So we're just gonna take a little chisel, pull that out. Then it'll probably fit a little bit better. So we're going to start to set it in and see how it looks. Okay, so this is actually looking very good. I think it's going to be one of those times where we're real fortunate and it's not going to need much fitting at all. I'm going to pull out, see if we can see where it's hitting without even tapping it in place. Oftentimes it'll hit up at the top of the bolster a little bit, hitting up here a little bit. So we're going to come get this out, tiny little bit. Maybe trim this a tiny little bit, but it won't need much. Okay. Make sure we have enough color on here. And we'll start taking a look at it and see. So let's give it a little tap and just see what starts to happen. So there's a little resistance at the bottom. If we tap a little bit, it may leave a little mark, or we can scribe the edge of it and be able to tell what's going on. So let's pull it out now and just see. Now we don't have I just have a little bit of a mark along there. You don't want to just hammer it in, or else you can split the wood. But sometimes if you do tap a little bit, it can give you a little bit of a witness line, which is actually starting to go in. So there's very little to trim, but there is a little bit to trim off the bottom edge of the plate there. We have a choice. We can remove it from the wood, or we could remove it from the metal. I'm going to go ahead and just remove it from the wood. It's a more traditional way of doing it, but it can be pretty easy just to file a little bit off the side of the plate too. So my eyes aren't as good as they used to be, so in this case I'm going to use some optivisors just to be able to see what's going on a little bit more. So I'm going to put those on, try to see where it's hitting with a sharp chisel, just go along and trim off a little bit of wood. So I can see where it's interfering. There's a little bit of color. If I can get in the right spot here. Okay. Again, you just want to shave a very little bit, not much. Because you don't want gaps. That's what we don't want. I'm just kind of working along. So I think after we get this done, maybe a few other trimmings, but it's probably going to go in place. Okay. So in this area, it needs a little less. So I'm going to scrape that area. And it starts getting to be a little bit more as we work back here. And by more, I mean, we're talking probably maybe 5 to 10 thousandths of wood. So not a lot, but a little bit. We could have also scribed along the edge with a sharp knife, perhaps a sharp scribe. But by tapping it, it can kind of leave you a mark a lot of times. Okay, so we're looking pretty good. Come back, get rid of this little sliver. Start here, actually. Come on. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Scrape a little bit, get rid of it. I see there's a little bit of something going on right here. This radius a little bit. We can trim a little bit here, although that's not real critical. Okay. Hopefully no chips in there, and we'll see if it'll go in. Okay, so it went in the mortise. And you can see it's nice and tight. So that's what we want. There's a chip in there holding it off a little bit. Okay, now it seems as though it needs to go a tiny bit deeper. So we're going to see what's interfering. Tap it to come out. Now the area right behind the barrel, I can point to it, is this area of wood supports the bolster on the lock, so there needs to be contact between the lock bolster and the wood in this area. However, I think it's a tiny bit high because I believe it's holding the lock bolster off of the barrel. So the bolster of the lock is this area here. This needs to contact the barrel, side of the barrel. It's very important. You don't want any gap there. If you have a gap, powder can get behind there, and it's just not a good thing. So you want to make sure the bolster contacts the side of the barrel. So a little bit of wood removal there, and should help it come on in. I'm also going to put a little more color on other areas of the plate to see if there's anything that's holding it from coming down. Running a little bit low on the transfer color, so I'm going to try to get a little bit more. Be very careful not get too much. Okay. Pick up a little bit off the side of the can there. Okay, so I'm going to trim that bolster with a little chisel just to remove a little of this wood. Not much. Come on. Just a very little bit. And you can also come in here and scrape a little bit. I see while I'm at it here, there's a little bit of interference here on the side, so we'll get that off. Most of it anyway. Get rid of the chips and we'll try to install it and see how it looks. Come on, get in there. So it's nestling down in there very nice. So we might have a winner there. We're getting close anyway. Okay, so we're going to tap it out. Oops. And we'll see if we can find where it's marking it all. So it's definitely marking again at the back. Sometimes it'll mark up front here. And I see a little bit, though not too much. So we're going to trim it again. And we'll probably stop about now and install the bolts that hold the plate in place, because it can pull it in. Do a little bit up front here, so I'm going to move to the back. So we'll do a little bit along here. This is an area that sometimes needs a tiny bit removed, because on the plates, typically this area isn't sanded as much. Okay, so I'm going to come along here, and I'm just going to turn and my chisel and cut that. Okay, I'm going to come around, work down here just a little bit, work these areas off a little bit. Not much is being removed, just a tiny little bit. And transfer color will tell you where. So I have a little bit of experience and I know some of the areas that are sometimes a little tricky, but transfer color will tell you where. So trust your thin layer of transfer color that you apply. Okay. Whoops, come on. So that should be pretty good. So let's go ahead and get on to doing the lock bolts. Now I'm going to go ahead and assemble this lock right now. Get rid of a little of the color, transfer color. So I'm going to assemble it real quick, and we're just going to put it together as a unit. Tumbler in first. Fly. Sear spring. That's how I do it. There's different ways of putting this lock together, but here's how I do it, right or wrong. Bridle. Get it started here. I don't tighten this screw down all the way to start with. Sear. So I put it in here, and I squeeze it with my thumb, get those screws to line up, and usually I can put enough pressure that I can get that screw to start. And there it goes. Okay, and come back and tighten that up. Make sure the sear is free. It's tight. We put on the caulk back on the tumbler shaft. Tap it. Find the screw, which is moved somewhere. There it is. Tighten that up. We'll go ahead and let's put the mainspring on. Take off the tension. Make sure it's down. One thing now, let's get the flint out of the jaws. When we're fooling with this thing, that flint can hurt you. So just take it out. Put the frizzen back on. Come on. Okay, it's frizzen spring next. So we're going to put it in here. I'm going to use our little cramp thing, whatever it's called, to compress it. Tap it, make sure it's all in place. Actually, I'm going to take the spring off because when we drill the hole for the lock bolt, it's going to be in the way, so we're going to remove that. Okay. So now we can start to put this thing in. Let's get rid of the frisson too. It doesn't need to be flopping around here. Okay, so we're going to put the lock in place. Okay, tap it in place again. Now we're going to get ready to drill and tap it for the lock bolt. I'm going to turn the gun around. First thing we're going to do is we're going to get our side plate. The side plate is fully machined. The inlet is fully machined. So there should be no problem in fitting it in without any wood removal. Make sure there's no chips. Line it up, put it in place, and voila, it goes in with no gap whatsoever. Perfect fit right out of the box. Something else we're proud of. Okay, so now on to installing the lock bolts. There's already holes that go through the side plate. They go through the wood, but they don't go into the lock plates. The lock is not drilled and tapped for the bolt. So that's the task that we're trying to accomplish right now. First thing we'll do is we'll get a C-clamp. Hold the lock in place. Snug it up. Okay, now find my drill bit. Get a drill bit that's the right size to slip through the hole in the stock. In this case, I don't know what it is. Let me see if I can see it. This happens to be a number 17 drill bit that I picked up. I think it's the right size. And it will cut a little bit of the side plate, but not much. I'm going to pull the caulk back to half caulk position will be fine. That way we don't hit it when we go through. Maybe full caulk would be better. So I'm going to cut a little of the brass to start with. Not that much, but it's just going to... Now it's going to follow the existing hole. And this is a snug fit. So what that does is... has created a dimple, a spot in the lock plate. So that's a spot for our tap drill, which is going to come next. We're going to go ahead and move to our front lock bolt. Okay, so that's spotted as well. I'm going to switch to a number 29 drill, which is the tap drill for an 832 thread. So I'm going to slip over here, around here this side, and what we'll do is we'll drill through the lock bolster. A good sharp drill is important. Okay, you can sometimes hear the drill sound change a tiny bit before it breaks through. You can kind of ease up, that way the drill doesn't slam against your side plate, but sometimes it does anyway, and it usually doesn't hurt anything. Okay, so now we'll use a tap in order to tap the holes. This is a 2-flute spiral tip tap. They sometimes call them gun taps. They work real well in that they're stronger than, say, a hardware store 4-flute tap, and they push the chip forward, they're much better than any other tap for doing this sort of work. You can put a little oil on it. Oil is a good thing. Sometimes I won't use oil because it can get on your wood and stuff, but oil is a good thing. I know this tap is good enough. I can get away without oil. Sometimes I even put a little saliva on it if that makes it seems to make it a little bit better. So let's see here. We can start threading it in. You don't want to break it off, that's key. So we're going to start threading it in. Okay, and this is, you oftentimes have to back off and break the chip, but this gun tap, spiral point tap, is good enough that it's just going. So it's a good tap. But it's a good practice to back up, break the chip after a quarter of a turn or so to be safe. So that's through. Okay, we're going to move on to the front. Lock bolt. And the reason why we're doing this all through the stock is it keeps the tapped hole lined up properly. If you try to do this outside of the stock, you're going to run into problems. Trust me, do it through the hole that's already in place. Okay, so we're going to pull the lock off, get rid of any chips that may be in there, and then we're going to install the bolts and pull them up tight. Get the lock out. Sometimes there's debris and chips, so you can see, we pointed out here, we created this hole, and we created this hole. There's metal chips and shavings in there. So we'll get this set in here. That's pretty good. Tap it in place. Now we'll find our lock bolts. Our 2 lock bolts. They're the same. Now the front lock bolt, I like to file a little bit off the tip. Not a lot, just a little bit. A few strokes with the file. You can put it in a vise if you're careful too. Chain it for the edge. That just ensures that it doesn't interfere with the frizzen spring. Front lock bolt, rear. Find your screwdriver that fits. Pull it in. Come on. Okay, so that's in. I always like, after installing the lock bolts, I like to tap the lock too to make sure it's in place. Let's see how the bolster fit is. It looks pretty good. It may not be a 100% perfect, but I'm going to wait until after I install the liner, because it'll be filed flush, to see how the fit is. Part of that line you see is the bluing, but it's pretty close, but it probably will need a little adjustment. And the way to adjust is, again, find anything that's keeping the plate from going in any further with transfer color and scrape, or just shave a tiny little bit off. But it's quite close, but still not good enough. So, but we're gonna wait until we install the liner to worry about that. We can put the frizzen spring on, the frizzen spring, just to make sure it's gonna clear. Come on, get in there. And by clear, it should be pretty close to the side of the barrel, but not scrape it when it opens up. When it's closed and then opens. So we put the frizzen spring on there. Down. Let's see if it'll open and close, which it does. It doesn't scrape the side of the barrel, so that's good. So this lock is basically inlet in place and ready to go. A little chip there we'll get rid of. So, you think we should end it here? Okay, that's enough for this video, and we will start again with another one. I think we've had enough to talk about here, so I'll see you here next time.